Welcome back. The fourth column of Rudimental Codex, this time with the inverted flam tap and a special Swiss interpretation of the flam accent, or the Butterfla, as it's called in Switzerland also. And at first, of course, the inverted flam tap or tap flam or the doublé, which is like an absolutely essential part of any Basel drumming tune. So the inverted flam tap, or the doublé, as it's also called, is actually a relatively simple rudiment, but it's one of the most underestimated rudiments I can think of. Before we take off with the exercises that are presented in the article, I would like to give you some little trick on how you can get into the proper sticking, because the most frequent misconception that actually happens with the inverted flam tap is you are leaning towards, say, falling back into the regular flam tap. So understanding that the inverted flam tap actually is an order of alternating, say, hand-to-hand stuff in triplet shape, for instance. And if you sort of collapse that, to use a term which was coined by the late great Jim Chapin, if you collapse that triplet-like structure, you can get into the inverted flam tap. Check this out. So, I mean, that seamless sort of evolution from the triplets to the inverted flam tap, that's kind of a difficult thing to do, but the three major stops in there, or the three major stations, if you want to call it like that, are this, moving into and then moving into a, say, shuffled interpretation of this previous rhythm. So it's almost like a jazz ride cymbal pattern, but played in hand-to-hand fashion, sort of, which then seamlessly goes into this flam-like interpretation. I mean, that's just a little trick that may help you with getting into the proper sticking. Now, the inverted flam tap in itself is one thing to study. In Switzerland, you find an interesting variation, rhythmically speaking, which almost falls like on a grid of 5. On a quintuplet grid, in terms of so it's not really played evenly. It has that, what I choose to call, Basel swing, which makes Basel drumming so special. And especially in more traditional Basel drumming pieces, it's actually really hard to find any piece which does not have a decent amount of inverted flam taps. So understanding that this, in Switzerland, is mostly played, is one of the aspects that make the codex special, because it comes with that extra information on interpretation and how the pattern would actually be phrased. So the exercise in the magazine, finally, works like with the inverted flam tap as a constant, say, foundation underneath the exercise. So you're playing this all the time, not really putting out an accent, but it's just, say, a foundation of relatively soft notes in which the flams are not reinforced by extra dynamics. And then on top of that, a reading text is put on the foundation of the inverted flam tab, which then creates the accents. So this little exercise would then sound like this. First in a straight interpretation, check this out. So when I was saying straight interpretation, I'm referring to straight 16th note rhythm. Right? Now, if you were to use the Basel swing, which again would be this, and you still apply the reading text, you end up with something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So as soon as you play that, it almost immediately gets that extra Swiss interpretation, which is so typical for Basel drumming in special. So far with the inverted flam tab, which again I think is a relatively simple pattern, but relatively difficult to play if you don't want to fall back into the regular flam tab. Okay? Now, the next part of the lesson is referring to the flam accent structure, which in Switzerland is also referred to as a Batafla or a Schlepptriole. Schlepp with being the Swiss-German expression for a flam, and Triole for a triplet. So the Schlepptriole is a flammed triplet, if you will. Okay, and of course, the standard structure of the pattern is this. We all know that. But again, in Switzerland, you have a special way of phrasing that, again, which is placed on the grid of 5. But this time differently as it was used before with the inverted flam tab. So with the flam accent, you have a phrasing which sounds somewhat like this. Check it out. So it's not even triplets, but it gets that extra Basel swing by playing the second stroke of the pattern a little sooner and the third one a little later. Which almost puts some sort of New Orleans-like second line feel to it, which is not very far away from that, from my perception. Okay, so again, the exercise with the flammed triplet or the flam accent or the Batafla or the Schlepptriole, which is again using that same foundation with playing this all the time and then putting accents on top of it, which are indicated by a reading text, makes the exercise sound like this. 1, 2, ready, go. The difficult thing about that is, of course, that the accent at times is a flam, at times is a regular standard single note. but not all the flams are accents, and it's about that challenge to keep the sticking of this here going, and not bringing in extra flams for the accents which are placed on the offbeat. So that's actually the difficult thing about that. So finally, in closing, we also present a PDF which sort of compresses all the information that makes the Rudimental Codex a bit special. So check that out, download it. You may also want to find out more about Percussion Creative, which is like a similar thing compared to the Percussive Art Society in the US. So we are putting this out to share the rich heritage of rudimental drumming, which is where we finally all come from. So understanding a bit more about that, understanding the heritage and that cultural background of the history of rudiments that originally came from Europe and were exported to the New World, which then later became the United States. That's something interesting to understand, and noticing about that historical background is something which is really helpful to look at our instrument as yet from a different standpoint. Okay. So finally, in closing, there are still a couple of say drum set adaptations out of this. So I'm playing a couple of these flam accent things here for you, which are really exactly what I have been doing just here, with the only exception that I'm not really using flams, but flat flams, meaning to play both sticks at the same time, both hands at exactly the same time, and I'm just splitting the exercise between hi-hat and snare. My personal challenge is that I'm doing this open-handed, so I have to switch all the stickings to the left. But if you look at these exercises as the note above the line being your hi-hat, the note below the line being the snare, then you're already there. And I'm just reinforcing the hi-hat accents with an additional stroke from the bass drum. That's it, and all of a sudden it sounds pretty hip, and it has that sort of drunken New Orleans-like feel, which is so popular today with a lot of drummers. Okay, so I'm ready for your questions. If you have any, feel free to send me an email or track me down on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and enjoy the codex, and I look forward to hearing back from you. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.